Hey guys, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase. So as a writer myself, I know how difficult it can be to come up with a really good opening line, or sometimes even just a solid line in your book. And I myself am guilty of writing some pretty cringy stuff that will hopefully never see the light of day, because yikes. But today I actually wanted to go into some of the worst opening lines slash some of the worst lines ever to have actually been published. And I promise you, you'll read through these lines and wonder how in the world an editor let this get through. His voice was warm and husky, like melted chocolate fudge caramel or something. And the culprit of this wonderful line is, of course, E.L. James. So this comes from 50 Shades of Grey, and I'm sure this entire video could just be quotes from 50 Shades of Grey, but I'm gonna try and keep it to just one because yikes. I don't think this line would be as horrendous if it didn't end with that or something. I mean, I wouldn't describe, fudge as husky. I mean, she starts off saying warm, so I should have said like warm, smooth or something like that. It wouldn't have been a bad line, like his warm, smooth, his voice was warm and smooth like melted, what was it, melted chocolate fudge caramel. I mean, I think in general also it has too many like descriptors. I mean, I'm huge on description. I usually like to start my books with or my stories really just describing the setting, but you have to edit yourself down, and you can still be descriptive, but that doesn't mean use every single adjective that you have available to you. And then on top of that, you add the or something. Like, why did she write that? Why was that like something that needed to be put in? You already provided this lengthy description that is very specific, and then you just kind of went like, or something. That's lazy writing. The cabin passenger wrote in his diary a parody of Descartes. I feel discomfort, therefore I am alive. Then sat with pen in hand with nothing more to record. So that actually comes from A Burnt Out Case by Graham Greene. I do want to say, I don't think I've read most of the books that these quotes come from, so a lot of these might make a bit more sense within, like, in the context of the book. This doesn't say anything to me about the character. I mean, all it says is that, okay, they might be into philosophy and they like to take notes. But do I feel like, oh, I want to know what this is about? Not really. And I think part of it is ending it with that whole like, and then you just sat there with nothing else to write. That to me feels again like that or something from the 50 Shades of Grey quote, because it's so like you're building up something, with the Descartes parody, as she had done with the whole fudge description, and then you just kind of go like, okay, whatever, doesn't matter. That's it. This is the only thing you're gonna know about this character, so do I care to read on and find out what this book is about? Not really. Rumors are the begetters of gossip. So that quote comes from The Marriage Between Zones 3, 4, and 5 by Doris Lessing. This line just doesn't make sense. It's saying like rumors beget gossip, as in, rumors are the origin of gossip. But I mean, like, rumors and gossip are kind of the same thing. I mean, you could argue that gossip might have some actual truth to it, but so could a rumor, so it's just kind of, it's not really saying something. I think it's trying to make the point of like, oh, if you're making stuff up, then it's gonna spread. But it just ends up kind of being weird because it's just saying the same thing twice, and it almost feels then like almost preachy, if that's the intention. If the intention is to be like, if you start a rumor or if you spread a rumor, then that's where gossip comes from. I don't know. It feels, again, it doesn't draw me in, and then it makes me stop because I'm like, well, what does that mean? What are you trying to say? It was like so, but wasn't. That is from Galate. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but that's by Richard Powers. This line has the same problem as the first two that we discussed. It's too vague and almost just takes away the purpose of their first line. So, it kind of establishes that we're going to be told about sort of like the way of life and how things have just been set in a specific way for so long. But then it's just like, it was like that except not like it, you know? Like that line from the interview, like same but different. So yeah, it just falls flat because it doesn't tell me exactly then what it's like, which is what I'm anticipating I'm gonna get next. And then it also just tells me it's exactly like that, but it's not at all. So then like it's weird. I don't understand like what the purpose of that line serves. It just feels very dismissive of the writer's own work. By the time we arrived, as evening was approaching, as I felt as sore as a rock must feel when the waterfall has pounded on it all day. Now that is from Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Gold. I don't think it's a terrible line, honestly. I think it's, again, the descriptor is the issue. And I know it's hard because a lot of people, you know, you don't want to use the same old metaphors that are, you know, overused, and you're trying to create something new and say something different. But then it sort of feels comical in this case, you know. It's kind of like, I feel like a rock after the waterfall has been, you know, pouring over it all day. That feels kind of like a cartoony thing to say almost. You know, the image I get in my head is a little too literal almost. And I don't think it conveys as well that whole sense of like, oh, I was, you know, exhausted. And even then, you know, that idea of soreness, I don't know. It's just, I don't put sore in like the weight and the pressure that the rock must feel from the water all day in like the same category. Like my brain doesn't automatically go like, oh yeah, that makes absolute sense. It's like there's a half step between the metaphor and the actual feeling, where my brain is like, I kind of get this and this kind of makes sense, but there's just something that's just not quite right. And I think it really just comes down to the imagery, the idea that the image that we get in our heads isn't exactly conducive to that soreness. I feel like this metaphor might almost work better if you were to talk about like a feeling of like feeling overwhelmed, since, you know, you have the idea of like all this water pouring onto a rock. Instead of feeling like, you know, I wouldn't automatically be like, oh, rocks must feel so much pain after the water's on them all day. I don't know. I just don't think it's the most effective metaphor, but I do give props to the writer because I have had that struggle of being like, well, how do I say this? How do I express this without saying the same thing that's been said 1,000 times before? And sometimes you just gotta take risks and you gotta make your own metaphors. So I don't think it's the worst line that we're gonna see today, but I do think it's just missed the mark by like a smidge. I think of my life as a kind of music. Not always good music, but still having form and melody. So this is from East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I mean, it feels ridiculous coming on being like, oh, I'm gonna criticize John Steinbeck. And I think this one has the same really issue for me than the Memoirs of a Geisha that we were just talking about. It just misses the mark by a smidge. I mean, yes, of course, not all music, but music that isn't good, which again is all going to be subjective anyway, but music that isn't always good, or essentially music that's bad, yes, it'll probably still adhere to some type of form and melody. That's not necessarily always true, but I think is, again, a case of like trying to create a metaphor that doesn't quite work. Because music is so subjective, and I guess you could say the same, you know, bad situations can be subjectively, you know, objectively a person in a worse situation would look at your situation as not that bad. But, you know, for example, if you have a death in the family or if there's an accident, I don't know, I don't feel a solid connection between the metaphor and the actual concept, because it's just trying to say like life is like music, you know, it's something beautiful, but even when it's not good, it still has its structure. And I think that just doesn't click entirely with me, and that might be completely personal, and I think that's what literature should be. It should be personal to everybody, but to me it's just kind of like, well, sometimes life does feel chaotic and it doesn't feel like there is a melody or a harmony or, you know, the structure to it. So I think that's the reason why this one falls a little bit flat for me, as well as just because I can't connect the idea to my personal, I guess my personal biases, my personal experience. So I don't think it's a bad one. Again, like I don't think it's the worst thing that we're gonna see today, but it just, again, for me, misses the mark by a bit. Vaughn died yesterday in his last car crash. So that is from J.G. Ballard's Crash. I can see what the author is trying to do. It's supposed to get you like confused and just like, what do you mean the last car crash? And that's what's supposed to draw you in. But instead, it feels almost redundant, because if he died, then of course, even if, like, for example, even if we're talking about potentially like a race car driver or something who's, you know, crashed before, or even if it's just a normal person who's been in a lot of car accidents, if you're already telling me he died, of course it's his last car crash. So I think the redundancy doesn't work as effectively for me, since, I don't know, it just feels like you're overstating your point. And I personally don't feel drawn in to read about it, just because it doesn't tell me something special. I think it's trying to, by highlighting that whole, like, it was his last car crash, so you're supposed to be like, what do you mean last car crash? But I feel like we can almost fill in those blanks without really needing to go into the book. Her legs swing complete afternoons away. That is from Rockaway by Jill Eisenstadt. Again, just another case of a metaphor that doesn't entirely make sense. I don't think this one even is as strong as the Steinbeck or the Arthur Golden. The imagery doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. It just feels like, okay, well, I mean, I get the idea of like, okay, swinging your feet and like you'd playfully pass the time, but I don't know, it feels like to me, and the way the line is written, it almost feels like it's supposed to be something like romantic, like you're looking at somebody lovingly and you're like, oh, you know, when I'm with them and we're having fun, time flies. But the connotation of the swinging almost feels childlike, and I don't get like a creepy vibe from it. It's just a confusing line that doesn't really, again, it doesn't tell me anything about the characters. It doesn't tell me anything about the plot. It's potentially descriptive of the character. You know, it kind of presents them as somebody who you can do mundane things with and time will just fly by, but it doesn't draw me in. I don't feel connected to this character. I don't see why I should care about them. And of course, you know, again, everything that I'm saying, take it with a grain of salt, because I haven't read probably any of the books we've just talked about. I haven't read them yet. But yeah, I don't think they have enough power. I would be more inclined to go into Memoirs of a Geisha or East of Eden than I would be, for example, to this book. Once upon a time, a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. And this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nicest little boy named Baby Taku. That lovely little confusing mess is from James Joyce's Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I will admit I have a bit of a soft spot for James Joyce, just because he had a level of confidence in himself that I admire, and I appreciate the fact that he was like, I'm not going to be the Irish Shakespeare, I'm going to be better than Shakespeare. I've read this book, actually. I've read The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I did not remember that being the opening line. I actually did enjoy this book. It's a lot easier to get through than, you know, Ulysses or something like that. But for much as I have a soft spot for James Joyce, had I not already known some of his work, and had I not kind of just been amused by his persona, I don't know that that's a book that I would be like, oh, I want to know what that's about, because it tells me nothing. It's repetitive. It doesn't really set the scene very much, and it feels almost like a kid's rhyme. like a nursery rhyme. I don't know. It's hard because it's James Joyce and you're like, of course you wrote this weird little thing and you probably meant something brilliant by it and we're just like not worthy of understanding your greatness. But yeah, I wouldn't be more prone to read this book through this first line than I would be, again, Memoirs of a Geisha or East of Eden. I think it's the repetition that gets to me. Like, I feel like, you know, an opening line should have purpose and it should make me want to know more. And right now I'm like, okay, why do I care about this boy? And what's the deal with, like, the first thing we're presented with is the moo cow. So I'm like, okay, why do I care? I don't understand what an artist has to do with a moo cow, what is happening. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sure scholars have a very different interpretation than me on this one. The sky above the port was the color of a television turned to a dead channel. So that is from William Gibson's Neuromancer. I think this is a really interesting metaphor. I can picture it in my mind, and it's supposed to, from what I read, supposed to be some kind of like a steampunky kind of genre that he writes in. I don't think it's bad, but again, I just feel like it's a half step away from actually making total sense. I can picture very clearly what's being said to me, but I'm assuming it's supposed to be kind of like a stormy night, so either like a, you know, lots of clouds or a lot of rain. You know, it's kind of like a dreary day, but I can't get like that grainy image. I think it's a little too specific of an image for me to picture it as something else. So I think my brain just takes it a little too literally, which is what happened with that Memoirs of a Geisha as well. I was saying, you know, I pictured that rock and that waterfall too much to be able to have my brain connect and process it as a metaphor instead of just like, yeah, okay, literal things happening in my brain. But I do think it's a really interesting take. I think it's, you know, a very unique way of describing the sky, which is something that so often takes part in literature when we're describing a scene, when we're setting up a scene. We want to talk about what time of day it is and what the day is like, and you don't want to just be like, it was the dark and stormy night. So I think it's almost like its own take of a dark and stormy night. So I give it a lot of props for being something unique, something very descriptive, but I think for me it was just like, again, a half step. Money in a voice that rustled. That, I can't even call it a line. That fragment is from William Gaddis's J.R. Starting with dialogue is weird anyway. It doesn't tell me anything about the book, doesn't tell me anything about the character, and it's just jarring. Like, it's not a complete sentence. Like, it's just a word of dialogue and then kind of a descriptor. I don't know. I think by far, well, I wouldn't put it worse than like anything in 50 Shades, but probably right below I would put this line, because it doesn't tell me anything about the character, doesn't tell me anything about the setting. It's just too vague, and I get the idea of, like, you know, you want to create maybe some suspense, or, you know, you want to draw your reader in by being vague, but this is too vague. Like, there's levels of how vague you can be so that your reader is like, ooh, that's interesting and I want to know more, which you can even see in that one about the last car crash. It's kind of like vague, but it might draw you in a bit if that's the type of thing that you're interested in. Whereas here I'm like, okay, money, what does that say? What, you know, it doesn't add anything. In the beginning, sometimes I left messages in the streets. So that is from David Markson's Wittgenstein's Mistress? Wittgenstein's? I don't know how to pronounce that. Looks very German. So I'm assuming something along the lines of Wittgenstein, but you'd probably pronounce it differently if he's an American author. I don't know. Anyway, this is not about how to pronounce the book title. This sentence has the same problem as that money one that we just did. It's too vague. I mean, I'm a bit more drawn into it because I'm like, messages about what, to who? Like I have 50,000 questions, but it's still too vague. I think it does a bit of a better job than the one we just saw, but it still is missing that component that adds a bit more specificity to take it from too general into something that actually can successfully draw a reader in. And again, it's also like in the beginning of what? Of the relationship, of time, of like, I don't know. It's just, it's too vague. And I guess it kind of succeeds in its purpose of drawing you in by having you ask all these questions. But I don't feel intrigued enough to actually like read the book and find out. You know, I don't feel like I would read that and be like, oh my God, this is a mystery that I need to unravel. It's just kind of like, I mean, I have these questions, but like it might be like a book that I'd be like, I'm just gonna put it in my like read eventually pile, but like I need to work through all of these before, you know? Psychics can see the color of time, it's blue. I did not read that incorrectly. That is the actual punctuation of this sentence from Blown Away by Ronald Suckenix. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that last name. This is a weird one, and I think part of it is the grammar, because there's not a comma between psychics can see the color of time, comma, it's blue, nor is it psychics can see the color of time is blue. I think it was a purposeful choice that I don't understand. I absolutely understand that as writers, we do sometimes take liberties with grammar, syntax, whatever. I just don't know that in this case it works. I don't know why it's blue. I don't know why we're talking about psychics. Is the book about psychics? Because if it's not, then it's weird, because like, then why are we talking about how psychics see color? Is it about time, which seems to kind of be its intention? But then why is this the first line? Why are we talking about psychics? Why is it blue? I mean, if you can compare that to, for example, Ruth Oseki's A Tale for the Time Being, which I've spoken about before on this channel, you know, that book starts off with a quote from For the Time Being, and then it moves on to Now's perspective, and she introduces herself as a time being, sort of establishing that idea that she's the main character and that we're going to talk about this time being, so obviously time is going to be very relevant in the story. Versus here, I'm like, okay, so is our main character going to be a psychic? Is it about time, or is it about something else? I am confused. I'm gonna look it up real quick, hold on. Okay, so it seems to be about an astrologer and mentist. What in the world is a mentist? It says mentist, maybe it was supposed to be mentalist. I don't understand what this book is about. Might be good, I don't know. I just know that that line is just, it just feels odd. It feels like too vague, and it doesn't tell me anything about our main character other than potentially they're a psychic, but it's, I don't know, it's just, Beatrice was on him like a piranha on corn dogs. I couldn't find a writer for this. I saw it on a list of like the worst lines from romance novels. I don't know if somebody made it up or if it's like actually from a book. It doesn't matter. Why? What is this sentence? Like a piranha on a corn dog, like it just doesn't make any sense. Again, it's too descriptive, but then it also doesn't make sense. It's almost like that whole like husky fudge. It's like fudge isn't husky. Piranhas aren't normally eating corn dogs. What is happening? Like I'm picturing, and because it's so specific, I'm picturing almost like a county fair, and then like I guess a piranha infested ocean. I don't know why people are throwing corn dogs into the ocean. Why are you contaminating? I'm so confused. And I really hope that somebody like purposefully made this line to be something awful, because I've seen some competitions around that are sort of like, can you write the worst like opening line? Because if somebody wrote this like in earnest and like they published this and this was like a line that they were proud of writing or that they sold out to write, oh my God, I would say this is worse than 50 Shades, and that's saying a lot because I have read a lot of horrible quotes. I've never read that book. I've just read a lot of lists of their worst quotes, and I think this one this one takes the cake. It's so bad. He smirks and cranks his glorious smile up another notch, so it's in full HD IMAX. Okay, I know. I said I wasn't gonna do another 50 Shades of Grey one, but this quote has been ingrained in my brain since I first read it. It's so dumb. It's so bad. I hate it. It made me laugh so much the first time I read it because it's so ridiculous. Like, and I think part of it is like the aggressively specific description of like, you know, I can see him in IMAX 3D or whatever. Why? Of course you're seeing somebody, you know, in HD. You're in the real world. It's real life. It doesn't get more high definition than something that's physically in front of you. And then the idea of like cranking a smile, what was it? Yeah, cranking a glorious smile up a notch. Like, I don't know. You don't crank it. I've just never heard somebody say like, crank that smile up a notch. Like, you know, you crank like, I don't know, maybe your energy up a notch or something, or like your motivation, a smile. And then like, also smirking annoys me in literature because you know that it's always like, oh, that hot guy, like he smirks and he's so cool and mysterious and like troubled. Apparently only mysterious, troubled characters smirk, and smirking is annoying because you're probably a very toxic character. But that's not the point. The point is that yeah, if you hadn't heard, I saw it in full HD IMAX. I wanted you to share that so that you could be traumatized alongside me. Okay guys, so that is gonna be it for today's video. I just wanted to do something that was fun. I don't really, you know, mean to critique any of these writers. They've made it much farther than I have. I just, you know, again, I don't think a lot of them were like honestly the worst thing, but they weren't great. I would love to hear your opinions down in the comments. What do you think? Do you disagree with some of the ones that, you know, do you disagree with this list? Do you agree with it? Are there any other weird, terrible lines that you can think of? But yeah, I just wanted to do something fun, something a bit lighthearted and different. I will be posting the final part to my Umbrella Academy book review this Friday, so keep an eye out for that. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you get that notification when that video goes up, and I will see you guys next time.